Welcome to the Provider's Report, where we delve into the world of value-based healthcare. Our mission is to empower healthcare providers with the knowledge and tools they need to deliver exceptional patient care. Each episode, we explore best practices, innovative strategies, and real-world examples of how to achieve the highest standards in patient communication and outcomes. Join us as we transform the future of healthcare, one conversation at a time.
Hey guys, welcome to Better Doctor Project, where we interview healthcare providers to tap into their experiences so we can turn our challenges into our biggest strengths. We hope today's episode inspires you to take that next step to become who you want to be in practice. I'm Dr. Beck.
And I'm Dr. Mack.
Let's get started. Happy episode day, guys. It's Dr. Beck. We have two powerhouse female docs on our show today, Dr. Stephanie Halloran and Dr. Vivian Lee, who are going to chat with us today about patient-initiated sexual harassment. This is common, guys. Like all of the time common. A lot of us females probably already assumed that, but the reality is this topic is not yet talked about enough in all of healthcare. We should be preparing students, young doctors, and so many more in the fields out there how to properly and professionally, keyword, handle these situations. There have been a few studies out there letting us know just how common this truly is among healthcare providers. Dr. Lee will fill you in on the numbers that we currently have at the beginning of this episode. But quite simply, it's just way higher than it should be. I wish personally that I could count on one hand how many of my colleagues have been referred to as the, quote, new hot doctor, unquote, at their place of work. It's just not okay. So the question is, how do we handle this the right way? How do we lead our healthcare teams and address these situations head on when they occur? How does this affect male providers, both directly and possibly indirectly? There are so many questions and we have such little time. And to be honest, Dr. Mack and I actually talked with these docs so long that we had to break up this episode into 2 full episodes because the content was just too good to crop anything out. So we really hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned something great today. And don't forget, make sure you stay tuned for part 2 for more great info. Hey everyone, we are here today with Better Doctor Project, talking with 2 incredible docs that Dr. Mack and I just love and adore. We have Dr. Vivian with us and Dr. Stephanie with us, and we're going to be talking about a topic that's not only extremely important, but also one that I personally feel doesn't get talked about enough. In our culture and society right now, we talk about sexual harassment all of the time, but I feel like we don't really take a step back and talk about it from a healthcare stance. You know, there is such a thing as patient-initiated sexual harassment, and it is happening to healthcare providers of all specialties and fields. So that is specifically what we're going to talk about today. So ladies, thank you so much for joining us, first off.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Can you just start off chatting with us a little bit about what patient-initiated sexual harassment is and what it might look like in healthcare?
Yeah, sure. So we define it as any unwanted attention or behavior that a provider finds offensive or makes them feel threatened or uncomfortable. And in terms of patient-initiated sexual harassment, it's any unwanted patient attention or behavior that makes us as providers find offensive or make us feel threatened or uncomfortable. And it can range from very subtle comments to very overt actions. For example, you're a really hot doc. And it can be a comment just like that, or it can be more overt, like writing a letter that's, explicitly sexual.
Yeah. So obviously in general society, I know the numbers for sexual harassment are pretty high. I know the one that everybody kind of thinks about the most is the 1 out of 4 females will be sexually harassed at some point in their lifetime. At this current time, do we have any kinds of numbers or just a general idea of how often this happens in healthcare?
Yeah. So in terms of the medical setting, there's been several studies done. In one study of 422 female physicians, 76% report that they've been sexually harassed from a patient. And then in a different study of doctors, nurses, NPs, and PAs, it ranged from about 53 to 59% receiving patient-initiated sexual harassment. And then in the physical therapy realm, the percentage is about 86% in one study. And there's been a very small chiropractic study that reports 42% of female providers that experience sexual harassment.
Is ridiculously high. And I'd have to imagine, I think all of us on this call right now, we're in a pretty hands-on profession, and we got pretty up close and physical with our patients. We touch them, we examine them. And I have to wonder, how do you feel this plays a role in the allowance and how important it is to prevent these types of issues from coming up? Do you find that providers in really hands-on and physical professions might be at a greater risk of having this kind of issue in their office?
Yeah, so there's no research out there specifically, but just from experience, I would think that the fact that as a chiropractor, I have multiple visits with patients in a very short window, as well as there's this component of care that involves touch, which is not common in other specialties. That definitely makes the physical and manual care aspects a little bit different than other professions as well.
Well, and it kind of makes me wonder too, our profession and several others tend to have a little bit more, I don't want to say the word emotional connection, but patients really like us.
Yeah.
And, they have a good experience in our office. I'm not the one, I'm not just their surgeon that they see one time and have very minimal conversations with. They get to know me, I get to know them. They love the fact that a week or two in, their pain levels have dropped, their quality of life has gone up. So they almost feel this unique connection, I guess, where it's not like I'm constantly presenting negative healthcare to them. So I almost wonder if some of the more friendly fields might have more experience with this too.
Yeah, and so you also have to remember the physical touch aspect crosses a different barrier than most professions cross. So usually a lot of if you think about primary care, the closest they're getting is checking your glands and maybe checking your abdomen, but actually touching someone and helping them feel better in the way that we do, even though it's not sexual, it could be very much sexualized by patients and taken the wrong way. So while I don't know that we experience sexual harassment more often, I would, and I have no data to back this up, I would assume that we probably experience more sexual harassment via touch and having that barrier crossed more often than, say, primary care or another profession like that.
For those who are listening right now, those providers who are listening who are not familiar with chiropractic care, we're sometimes, when we're doing manual adjustments, not just touching the patient like you would on an exam, although we do abdominal exams and those things as well, but we're actually sometimes physically putting our entire body on or over the patient. And so I would imagine this really opens some doors. Sometimes I think we as providers probably don't even realize the doors that we're opening and the closeness, right, that we're providing to that patient who may not get that kind of closeness with anyone else in their life. We don't know always what's going on in their personal lives. And I think that goes to staff as well, not just to providers, but any supportive staff in our offices. I think they may sometimes not realize too how close they're getting with a patient. Patients, like you said, Dr. Beck, feel comfortable. Sometimes they come in and it almost feels like they're coming home when they come into the office. I know from personal experience, they're like, "Hey guys, I'm here," and it's great to have that kind of love and confidence flowing through your practice. That's how patients know you care. But I think there's a fine line of balance, and I think a lot of that starts with us as providers and the tone that we set in our office, and being aware of what doors we already have open for them to walk through. So when I'm doing an exam, there are a lot of times where I might have to ask the patient, where's their pain, right? And there are frequently times where they want to show me, touch my body. Oh, can I show you right there? Or they're going to show me on their own body, and other situations like that. And sometimes I have to think ahead, a couple steps ahead. And this is something I just learned from trial and error, unfortunately, because we didn't have a podcast like this. I had to think ahead and say, oh, yes, go ahead and show me on your body, or direct them, right? Some other way so that they're not necessarily touching me. So I think of those things because I've had them happen to me. But sometimes I know our staff maybe has never experienced that before, or maybe doctors listening or nurses listening on this podcast haven't experienced those situations before. So what are some things that you think that we should be aware of in a healthcare setting before that patient ever walks through the door, and how we can help train our staff to appropriately sort of look ahead for those issues that might arise?
So I would say the first thing for a female provider or staff is clothing choice. And same thing, I learned this while I was in clinic and had to, for those of you not familiar with chiropractic, when you're adjusting someone and bending over, should your shirt fall forward and the patient is face up, it can leave you very exposed. And I learned that in a VA setting in the Veterans Administration, working with veterans, and learned very quickly to lean forward and check my shirts every time I went into work to treat people. And so I think that can be a thing that's overlooked very early on and maybe not thought of because we want to look nice and look presentable. And we don't think we should have to think about men looking down our shirts when we're treating. So I would say clothing choice is probably the easiest way to limit some of that extra attention that you might get.
Yeah, and there's also ways that you can direct patients to help avoid certain actions, right? So you brought up doing an exam, and patients frequently want to show you their pain on their body or on your body and not on their body. And so it can be as easy as a direct cue to say, on your body, show me where your pain is. It avoids them feeling like they should touch you because you're giving them a direction to go. And also, as a provider, it's better for us to see where a patient's pain is on their body than for their interpretation on our body and then our interpretation back on their body. So a direct cue like that during an exam really helps avoid a patient from reaching towards you and touching you, even though it's not meant to be inappropriate. It still can make you uncomfortable, and it is easily avoidable.
It's great too, because I think it also reinforces that doctor-patient relationship too, of you are guiding them through this whole, situation, whether it's pain or the exam or whatever it is, you're there to be their guide and to help them. So I love that, because it just jumps ahead and really paves the way for them to do the right thing to get them better and refocuses back on their health, which is really great.
So when it comes to our staff, is there anything we can do to make our offices, clinics, and departments more secure regarding these types of issues? I mean, obviously, if anything like this ever happens to one of them, we as the managerial department and as the providers probably want to know what's going on. So how can we make sure that they're going to feel comfortable discussing these situations with us?
Well, I mean, you can establish that culture in your clinic at the start. So you can have those conversations where it's a place that it is okay and it is expected that they will disclose that information and they will be supported in what's happening. So I think that there's a lot of fear around reporting it. Obviously, when you're in a private practice or in a business, there's money that is tied to patients. And so you don't want to lose the business money, especially if you're an employee. If you don't know the management very well, and if the management is composed of mostly males, it could be very intimidating to come to them and explain to them, and embarrassing too, because you almost feel like you did something wrong and you could have done something to prevent it. So I think having that discussion as a team that we will not tolerate this if this happens to you. This is what it looks like if it happens to you. We will fight for you. We will stand behind you, and continuing to normalize that. And then on top of that, establishing that culture by having your patient sign some kind of agreement at the start, just like you do with HIPAA forms and everything else, saying, this is the type of conduct we expect. If you do not uphold this, then we, reserve the right to fire you as a patient. And if it does happen, if it's a milder offense, you can show the patient you signed this agreement. You've said that you're not going to do this, yet you are. If this happens again, we're not going to be able to see in this clinic. Or if it's a more extreme offense, then, you have that stating that the patient said that they weren't going to do this, they did. And that's kind of being reestablished and showing the staff that you will support them. There are smaller comments that happen, such as comments about looks. We've heard stories from, recent graduates that they were in student clinic at universities and they brought explicit letters to their clinicians, and their clinicians continued to make them see patients without confronting things. So I think that, once you get to that level of it being that extreme, females have probably gone through several iterations of this in different forms, either via comments or letters or something else where it's likely somebody didn't stand up for them before standing next to them. And that makes it harder to report it or to stand up for yourself after you haven't been supported so many times in the past for much simpler, less embarrassing things.
I think there's a whole gamut, like you said, of everything from comments to physical action. And I think some of that happens also regionally. So I think it's important to know and really explore in yourself before you ever get put in that situation where your boundaries are personally. And unfortunately, it's not very comfortable to think about these situations happening, but I think it's really vital to take the time to actually explore that within yourself and where you feel your boundaries are. Because I think we've probably all been in situations where somebody said something to us and we laugh it off or move forward or don't say anything, whatever it is, however we choose to address or not address it. And then later on, we're still thinking about it. And we're like, man, I wish I would have said this, or I wish I would have handled that situation differently. And it's great because we learn from that and we move on. And that's what we're all about here, is learning from experience. But if we can prevent that and we start thinking about where our, stomach might get in a knot if someone says something to us just over that line, figuring out where that line is for us individually, and I think encouraging our staff to do that preemptively is really helpful. I know regionally, I'm in the South. My whole family's from New York, so they're pretty blunt and straightforward there. But in the South, it's not unlikely that someone's going to walk in and be like, "Hey, sugar, how you doing?" And for me, that's not a big deal working here. My first job was actually in the panhandle of Florida, which everybody has real thick accents. Everyone's real sweet. Bless your heart. And it's super fun and everyone's really nice. And there's just a different lingo there, right? And there are different colloquialisms that come through no matter where you are in the country or in the world. So for me, that was my first time ever living in the panhandle of Florida. And I remember people would come in all the time. Oh, hey, I went by Dr. Mack there. So patients would get surprised. They'd come in, "You're Dr. Mack?" They're like, "I expect like a big guy, like a Mack truck, like a Big Mac." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, just me. Hey y'all," And but everyone was really nice to come in, saying, "Hey sugar, hey sweetie, honey bun, how you doing?" They didn't mean it in a negative way. Whereas if I was practicing in New York or living still in Pennsylvania, I think it would have come across very, very differently. However, there were times when this line was crossed. So for example, I know we were talking earlier about clothing choices. For me personally at that job, I wore dress clothes at the time, always high-necked, always, comfortable and very covered. And we also wore white coats. So everything was pretty much covered. There was no worry about bending over, anything like that. And a lot of the patient files were in a big case behind the front desk. Well, one day I was back there, had to get a file from the very bottom shelf. And there was thankfully nobody else in the office except for my front desk, and the other doctor was in the back. And I, thinking ahead, knelt down on one knee to get this file as opposed to bending over, right? So here I am, down on a knee, finding this patient's file, and a lovely Southern gentleman comes in, says hey to the front desk, peeks over the front desk as he's checking in, and says, "Oh, you look good on your knees." That was that moment where I realized, all right, here's that line. Okay. Nothing that I could have done would have prevented that situation at that moment. And I thought to myself, this is the first time that he's done that. My options are play it off, talk to him straight up, make a joke back. There are so many different things you can do, right? And anyway, after a moment, I got up and I thought, you know what, we're just gonna let that go for the moment. But if anything happens again ever, we're having a very frank talk about this. So I stood up after I found the file, and he said, "Oh, the lady got a raise," and I said, let's go have a chat. So we had to sit down and we had to talk about that. He was extremely apologetic. He handled it very well. And I just simply explained to him the issue with what was happening. And I said, from now on, you'll be seeing the other doctor, right? And that was it, because the other doctor was a male doctor. And everything went really smoothly, thankfully, for me at that particular time. But I think regionally, that line gets so blurred sometimes. And I'd be curious to hear what those situations are like for you guys in different parts of the country, if there are certain things that are normal for you, but might not be normal in other areas.
That's a very interesting story, and you handled it quite well, Dr. Mack. I think you really thought about different ways to address what was happening. And I think to answer your question, first of all, every situation is different and the context is completely different. Even the same words from different people can have different subtle intentions towards it and can be perceived differently, right? So a 95-year-old man calls me baby is different than a 25-year-old that calls me baby. And that is all judgment. But I think what it comes down to is remembering to think about or identifying with what makes you uncomfortable. If that makes you uncomfortable, then perhaps think about addressing it. And you don't always have to address comments or actions directly. You can do it in many ways. Like you brought up the example of making a joke, right? That can be a very good way to address something that's happened in a subtle manner that doesn't feel like you're getting attacked on the patient side, but also gets your point across. And there's lots of different ways that you can address the situation and what's going on. But I would like to say that this type of stuff happens out of nowhere. There's not like, oh, I think this guy's going to make a weird comment. It just suddenly happens and you get caught so off guard that you don't sometimes have even enough time to think about it and think about what to say before the moment is over and there's a different exchange of information or a different conversation. Everything has moved on, right? And so it really does happen out of nowhere. And I think Dr. Halloran has really good ways to address it. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so I will actually say that I've adapted the way that I address it. So first, regionally, it's been interesting because over the last 6 months, I've transitioned from New Haven, Connecticut to Charlotte, North Carolina. So the southern part of things, I am very much growing accustomed to being called darling and honey and ma'am pretty regularly. It's funny, I actually had a patient today call me darling, and immediately just his face just froze, and he's like, I'm really sorry, ma'am. I'm from the South. I call everyone, I didn't mean any disrespect. Like, I know you're a doctor. And I was like, you're okay. You're very sweet, but thank you for apologizing. But as far as adjusting it, I found myself more not addressing it as my way of addressing it. So it actually happened just a couple weeks ago. I had an older man, a nice guy. I've been treating him probably 4 or 5 times now. And he came in and we're nearing the end of our session. And as I'm about to adjust him, lumbar side posture, he's like, yeah, I was telling my boss how I get to go see this beautiful and really smart chiropractor who just, wails on me, and it makes me feel so much better. And it was the last patient of the day. It had been a hectic Monday. And I was like, I just don't have the bandwidth for this right now. And I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I didn't acknowledge it. I just said, okay, like take a breath, blow out, relax, and just left it at that. And sometimes that is, if you're really uncomfortable with it, that is the best way to respond. So no nervous laughter, don't even acknowledge them. And usually they get the cue that you're not going to entertain that. My other favorite way for beginners to engage is just by using a one-word response. So picking something that's unwelcomed, that was inappropriate, just picking that one word and saying that out loud, that's unwelcomed, can just be a fast enough response that you can do on the spot without really having to think about it. So those are probably my top two favorite ones. There's other ways that you can approach it that maybe aren't as direct or as cold. If you're more of a warm, bubbly person, I'm not. But if, you can say something like, I think you meant to give me a compliment, but that statement was, inappropriate, or that statement was unwelcomed. And I'd really appreciate it if you'd stop saying things like that to me while we're in the office. So I think those are probably the three simplest ones. If it keeps happening, saying, you keep talking about the way that I look, I'd rather focus on the way that I deliver care and how much better you're feeling. And if you can't focus on the work that we're doing here, we're going to have to terminate care. We won't be able to see each other anymore in this setting. I think those are all fair responses. And it depends, on the person, like Dr. Lee said, you know your patients and you know what they're saying or trying to say, or if they're being extremely disrespectful, or if they're just being, a cute 80-year-old man who really means no harm. And so you get to choose the way that you respond to that based on the way that you feel. But even if you walk away from the situation, like you said, Dr. Mack, you leave and it's turning around your head, you are welcome to bring it up at the next visit. You don't have to bring it up right away, but at the end of the visit, you can say, when we met last week, you said this thing. It made me feel really uncomfortable, and I don't want you to do that again. Like, you are welcome to bring that up at a future appointment and tell them that you did not appreciate it.
What a good reminder. I've never thought of that for some reason, because I'm like you. I am very direct when this happens, almost to a fault. And I think the VA also created that in me from my time there. But I think if you, for some reason, get so caught off guard, you absolutely can bring it up at the next appointment if there is one. By all means, and sit on what you want to say, if that's comfortable for you, whatever makes you feel more comfortable at the end of the day, because we might think about it for a whole week or a whole month after it happens. And if that's the closure you need to get over it and just feel comfortable in the sense that, hey, I confronted that person, if that's what's going to make you feel better, why not? So thank you for bringing that up. That's a great point. You can always come back to that.
Well, it's also, you have to think about it in the way that if it's bothering you that much that it lasts until the next appointment, how good of care can you deliver as a physician? If you are very hyper-focused and, maybe angry at this person for being disrespectful, how can you then provide them the best care possible when you're harboring that?
Oh, absolutely.
Plus, if they didn't mean it, and they came across in a way that they didn't intend for whatever reason, they're going to probably feel that, energy shift in you the next visit as well, which is also going to affect your care and how they perceive your care.
They're going to be more mindful going forward, especially if they didn't mean it. And you're like, well, this is the way that I took what you said. The next time they think about saying that to a female, they may think twice and say, you know what, Dr. Mack told me that this is inappropriate. I should probably not say this to this random person I really don't know.
And I'm going to get a little philosophical, but I think that as women and men growing up, we have very different expectations and almost like stereotypes or models that we kind of fit into, right? And I think that oftentimes men feel like it's completely appropriate to make comments on another person's looks or a woman's looks and say those types of things. And they think that it's 100% fine because they've grown up with it and that's been the model. And it's, as doctors, we're supposed to educate our patients on their body and their health, but it's also maybe appropriate for us to educate them on what is inappropriate to another person.
And that's why uncomfortable conversations matter, because you're helping and protecting other people in the future too. It's not all about you in that moment either.
You guys, this is exactly why we have these conversations on Better Doctor Project. I can't believe that we've already reached the 30-minute mark, but that means that it's time to wrap up this episode. It also means that this conversation is way too good to stop now, so we're going to have to go ahead and keep the conversation going with the second part of the episode, Hot Doctor, which will be coming out in just 2 weeks. So make sure you hop back on to catch the second part of this really important conversation and how we as providers can empower ourselves and our staff and colleagues to make excellent choices and actions when it comes to these difficult situations in our office. So this week, make sure to go to betterdoctorproject.com and click on our show notes for this episode so that you can get all the visual and tangible resources that we'll be posting there so that you feel confident in implementing this in your office, practice, or department tomorrow. Share this with all of your friends and colleagues because you never know when this is going to happen to you or a beloved coworker or an employee or maybe even your supervisor. We need to know how to handle these situations no matter the role we play when it comes to patient care. We'll see you for the next half of this episode in just 2 weeks.
We loved connecting with you today on this episode of the Better Doctor Project. We can't wait to share our next podcast with you in just 2 weeks. Same time, same place. Until then, pop over to Instagram to follow us at Better Doctor Project or keep up with us at betterdoctorproject.com.
Thank you for tuning in to the Provider's Report. We hope you found today's episode valuable and inspiring. To stay updated with our latest episodes, subscribe to our podcast wherever you like to listen. For more resources and continuing education opportunities, visit our website. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of our patients and truly set a standard for value-based healthcare.